Welcome back. Mixed markets this Tuesday morning. Take a look at futures indicating a gain at the start of trading this morning. Fractional higher across the board. Dow Industrials up 15. The Nasdaq now up 3.5, and the S&P higher by 1 point. President Trump extending the U.S.-China tariff pause for another 90 days. Today was the deadline. He will extend it now to November 9th, keeping the levy on Chinese imports at 30%. That is way down from the 145% initially. Beijing will keep the tariff on U.S. goods at 10%. Both sides continuing negotiations ahead of a potential fall meeting between the president and Xi Jinping. President Trump also says he will not impose tariffs on gold, easing concerns in global bullion markets. Joining me now is TJM Institutional Services Director James Iuorio. James, good to see you. Your thoughts on all of this, extending the pause on China and no tariffs on gold?
So the pause on China is a good thing. As you know, I've been saying this whole time that everything about this tariff and trade policy has been just about an eventual showdown with China. I will amend that a little bit too, and I think India has been pretty important in this as well. But it's still, we're angling toward the China thing. Now, here's what I like about the pause is that it gets the market used to the fact that there's really not ever going to be a final end date on these negotiations. And now everything's settled and we've cleared a path for the next 10 years. That's not how this is going to work. We can sign a trade deal, but right away after that, I think there'll be people who are looking to amend it, making sure that both sides are complying. So I like the fact that it's getting the market used to this is a never-ending sort of thing. Now, as far as everything else is, the next thing I'm going to say is really going to irritate me because I hate when people say it because they always act like that you're at a critical moment in history. But we are for our economy right now. Back to August 1st, when we saw those disastrous non-farm payroll numbers, the market wanted to believe that there's no more inflation. And this is related to China thing, too, because it speaks to the health of our economy currently right now. So today we have the CPI numbers coming out. If those numbers surprise to the upside, that throws a wrench in everything because that smacks of stagflation a little bit. And the market now, like, I don't expect any sort of big rally in stocks before we can digest that number, if that all makes sense.
Well, I mean, look, we are expecting a gain, a fractional gain in the CPI today. Does a sort of a worse than expected CPI number move the Fed?
Yeah. So back to August 1st, we were pricing in almost 75 basis points of cuts before the end of the year. Now the worry of the CPI has brought that back significantly lower. It's almost less than 50. There's only 80%. I actually last week thought that there's a chance of 50 basis points at the September meeting after the disastrous unemployment numbers. Now the market's pricing in just an 80% chance of 25 basis points. So I disagree. I think the economy's in worse shape, which has to mean that inflation is coming off, or else we have bigger problems. If inflation is still going higher at the same time the labor market is deteriorating like I believe it is, then all of a sudden the Fed can't ease as much as they want and the stock market could suffer. So right now the stock market being kind of a sideways pause seems legit until we see this number. By the way, I would like to mention too that the small business optimism number just came out about 2 minutes ago, and it was pretty good. It was over 100. That was a solid number. And to me, that's important. It doesn't seem like a lot of people look at that, but I definitely do.
That is very good. We're going to speak with Kelly Loeffler, the Small Business Administrator, coming up in the program. But in the middle of all of this, there are questions about the data. John Lonsky, jump in here because the president just nominated Heritage Foundation economist and the frequent guest on this program, E.J. Antoni, to lead the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The president firing the previous commissioner over what he called rigged data in jobs reports. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who is leading the search for a new Federal Reserve chairman, Fox Business can report that he's expanding the shortlist to include Vice Chair Michelle Bowman and Philip Jefferson, along with Dallas Fed President Lori Logan. They'll be interviewed in the coming weeks with the president's official choice expected this fall, John.
Well, we don't want to ignore the reality, and that is that the leader of the Federal Reserve, or perhaps to some extent the person in charge of statistics at BLS, will be in some way influenced by their own worldview. And, people voted a conservative like Donald Trump into the presidency because they want Donald Trump to put people in high places as far as economic decision-making is concerned who share Donald Trump's conservative take on the world. So it's high time that something like this was to occur. Going back to the BLS, I mean, it's really hard to prove that there's a strong political bias involved here. But you can't help but think that on the margin, whoever is in charge of overseeing the data is in some way influenced by their political leanings. And that's going to be especially true for the Fed. My goodness, you could argue till you're blue in the face, but it's hard to toss aside the possibility that that 0.5 percentage point rate cut we got back in September of 2024 was not in some way influenced by a desire on the part of the Fed Chairman Powell to turn the election a little bit more in favor of the Democratic challenger.
Yeah, well, look, a lot of people have said he's so political, Jay Powell, at this point. But, James, what do you make of E.J. Antoni? You know, he's been a critic of the Bureau of Labor Statistics for a long time. He's joined us on this program many times, questioning the numbers. Here's E.J. Antoni with me just recently. Watch this. Former President Biden claimed that he created more jobs than any president in one term, but you've got new jobs data showing nearly 1 million fewer jobs created than the nearly 800,000 that Biden claimed. You said that his data did not reflect the jobs numbers until the next year.
That's exactly right, Maria. And this, unfortunately, has become a pattern that we saw time and time again. We talked about on your show quite a few times. Even when we got very good reports, we always had to include the caveat of, look, these numbers are probably going to get revised lower. And it wasn't just the next couple of monthly reports that would revise them lower, but then the big annual benchmark revisions, with this last one that we got just earlier this year showing a downward revision of about 600,000. But the fact remains that the job statistics were fundamentally broken, in my opinion. It points to a labor market, Maria, that was nowhere near as strong as we were led to believe.
Well, that's the problem, James. Too many revisions.
So if there was just wild revisions for the last 2 years, they would have looked incompetent. The fact that they're constantly in the same direction makes them look political. John's point, it absolutely does. The fact that there's people complaining like, well, E.J. Antonio's, he's biased. Are you kidding me? What is the downside here? It can't get any worse. There's one thing I'd like to add too, is financial markets trade off these numbers. Everybody who you talk to believes and knows that they are garbage. And just the first time you see a number, it's going to be wildly different the second and third time. But they believe that everybody is going to trade off these numbers. So you can't be the one who's not. So even if we don't believe the data, they are still impactful. Like CPI, everybody knows that the Fed looks more at PCE, but the market is conditioned to trade off CPI. So that's what they'll do until something huge changes that. And I don't see that happening anytime soon.
That's a great point. James, good to see you. Thank you, sir. James Iuorio joining us.